let's dive in. The Ponderosa this morning, 7:55 in the a.m. Gaggle of media assembled just outside the fence, as we generally do. They read us the rules, and then let us go watch a little bit of football, kind of. It's kind of football. But I did, just kind of take a few notes and kind of looked around. It's the first thing I noticed when I got out there this morning is, and look, I've gone to spring ball now for 12 years, so I understand how it operates, and it's not a shocking thing, but it is noticeable to me. You get out there the first fall practice, I mean, whistles are blowing, coaches are yelling, guys are moving, they're sprinting between positions. It is crisp, it is smooth, it is moving. That's Les Miles, that's Ed Ogeron, that's Brian Kelly. It doesn't matter who the coach is, how good the team is. When you get out there in the fall to crank things up at the 1st of August, it is moving. And today was crisp and fairly efficient, but it's just down a couple of notches. You got some walk-ons out there. You've got some starters to be who aren't out there due to injury always. A lot of your signing class isn't there. You're lower on numbers. Maybe there are some new coaches with their first practice. Like it's just down a couple of notches. And it was very noticeable. So like they're standing around and kicking grass and not like the guys don't know where to go and the coaches are yelling at people. It's just everybody's relaxed a little bit more, I would say, out there. I spent most of my time this morning watching the defense. That wasn't necessarily because I found the defense far more interesting. It was because we could only stand on one side of the field, and I could walk like 60 yards and see the defense, or I could walk 180 yards and watch the quarterbacks do footwork drills, and I chose to walk to 50 yards and watch the defense. So that's just an open book here. I'm not suggesting there was something far more captivating on one field than the other. It was closer, and I kind of already know what the quarterbacks do. So I stayed on the defensive side of the ball and picked up a couple of things. One brought me back to a little bit earlier this week, and I have no pride. I have no ego. I'm just going to let it know, just let you know how this happened. 2 days ago, I did a linebacker preview on this show. To prep, I had a whole page full of notes on linebackers. I had gone back to last year's roster because this year's wasn't published yet. I wrote all the names down, wrote some stats next to them, heights and weights, classes. I went to On3. I checked the transfer portal. I checked the early enrollees, the signing class, wrote those names down, heights and weights, had some notes, career history, just tons of stuff that I had written down. And I did a segment on the LSU linebacking core. And part of my segment was they feel a little bit thin at this position. I'm looking at the numbers, proving it just had some transfer out, some Mario Tolan moved on. It just feels a little light at linebacker. That was on Tuesday. I did a segment. On Wednesday, yesterday, I go on to Shreveport Radio, as I've done every Wednesday since 2011 at 5:30, and was chatting with the guys, and somebody texted into that show and said, tell Hunt he did a whole segment yesterday on the linebackers and didn't mention the only returning inside linebacker starter, Greg Penn, in the entire segment. And he said, Hunt, is that true? And I thought to myself and I went, that is definitely true. I did an entire linebacker segment and left out the one returning starter. He was out there today. I was like, I knew it looked a little bit thin when I went through it. I just whiffed. And I did put a caveat at the beginning of that segment going, I feel like I might have missed somebody because I'm rolling through, but this is what I miss Greg Penn. You do live radio for years and years and years. I'm only on year 2. Matt's on year 10. Haney's on year 25 or 30, whatever it is. Sometimes you're just going to screw up, and I just flat missed on Tuesday with my linebacker segment. But it leads into the first thing that I saw today when they went on some very light 11-man defensive work with the whole unit out there chasing the ball. No pads on or anything, but I looked out, and right there's Greg Penn and Harold Perkins as the starting inside linebackers going through the drills. Harold Perkins is wearing number 4. He's standing next to Greg Penn. I think, as we kind of hypothesized, as Brian Kelly has said in the past, Harold Perkins' role is going to change a little bit entering this fall. Last year, he was kind of create the mismatch, go get him. We need to put him right on the right tackle because he can't guard him. Sure. Do we need to blitz him up the A gap? Sure. Sometimes teams schemed him into the slot. But he was moving around a lot, and I think he'll move around some this year. But for the purpose of the first spring practice to go out there and set the first 11 to go out there, Harold Perkins and Greg Penn were your first two. Right behind them were Omar Spates and West Weeks. And I will tell you, after doing that linebacker segment on Tuesday, and looking at the way things looked on my notebook paper and then seeing it today and then writing it down, Harold Perkins, Greg Penn with the ones, Omar Spates and West Weeks with the twos, that sounds a little bit better. Harold Perkins is a potential All-American first-round pick. Greg Penn was not an all-league player last year, had his ups, had his downs, was fairly steady, I would say would be the word I would use to describe him. Omar Spates was a first-team All-Pac-12 player, and Wes Weeks is now a third-year college player with some starts under his belt and a lot of football under his belt last year, though it wasn't necessarily as a linebacker. That looks better. Would it surprise me if it was Perkins and Spates in the first one, or if it was Penn, Spates, and Perkins in the first one? No, it wouldn't. I think those are your first three guys, and then you got some guys that'll fill in behind them. But the first two guys running an inside linebacker today were Harold Perkins and Greg Penn. And no, I do not mean to sound like the guy who watches literally 20 minutes of the first spring football practice to sit here and tell you who the starter is. That's not the point. I'm just telling you where Harold Perkins was standing, and I found that interesting. Defensive line is really thin right now just on numbers because most positions, or I shouldn't say most, a lot of positions are thin in spring football. They were 10 years ago when the transfer portal didn't exist. Now that guys are transferring out by the truckload at the end of the football semester and not coming in some instances until the summer, it's even thinner in a lot of places. And the defensive line is that way. Mason Smith was not out there today. Mekhi Wingo is not out there today. There were several players not involved in the workouts. Jordan Jefferson's not going to practice all year. I did not see Jalen Lee. I can't swear he wasn't out there. I'm trying to run through the numbers in my roster sheet that's sitting right here on my desk, and I'm going through, and I didn't see Jalen Lee. It was a thin group at defensive line. I did notice that Savion Jones was going through the drills first with the defensive line. And again, doesn't mean he's the starter. I'm just telling you now, I watched him get through the drills first, and feels like that's the guy that the staff kind of thinks and genuinely hopes emerges as the next star. B.J. Ojulari had a really good career here. Ali Gay had a really nice career at LSU. Savion Jones is next up. And the sincere hope, I think, from a lot of people involved is that he becomes the next star, the next leader, the next all-conference player, potential high draft pick. He hasn't realized that potential to this point. He's flashed it for sure. Now it's time for him to kind of take that mantle and be one of the leaders. Another note from the defensive side, Javian Toviano is a name that we talked about a ton in recruiting. He was one of the guys who committed late in the early signing period. He was one of the guys that you were kind of focusing in on as a fan base. Okay, who are the names that are left on the list that, okay, we think we might get. And Toviano was always part of that, and you thought you had a really good chance to land him, and LSU did. Now, he's thought of as kind of a hybrid in the secondary. He's smart. He's physical. He is not the fastest player on the field. Maybe that means he moves to nickel or safety. Maybe he stays at corner. And today he was working with the corners. The nickels had a different spot where Sage Ryan was going through things as kind of the leader of that group. And you had the safeties. Major Burns was kind of running his crew over there. And then you had the corners that were doing drills as a cornerback unit. And Javian Toviano was working with that group. So, again, I think as we move into the summer and into the fall, they're going to kind of see where they may need some help, where maybe somebody emerges here or there. They see more of Zy Alexander, have a better idea of whether or not, man, that's maybe not a guy who transitioned to this level as well, or maybe, that's a guy who's going to be absolutely an SEC player. And chess pieces move around in that way. It's way too early to do that, but that's the kind of forward thinking that you would do commenting on spring football. And I think with Javian Toviano, he'll start with the corners, may end up helping you a little bit at nickel. Maybe somebody goes down, unfortunately, or whatever, and maybe he can take a look at safety. But he's a hybrid guy who is going to have an opportunity to get to the field pretty quickly. Just not exactly sure where yet, and he was out there working with the corners today. And then Major Burns, as you would expect, was very much the leader of the safety group. And I did take a notice of one drill that they were doing where the guys were kind of going through it, and they were learning to kind of attack the football, take on a blocker, shed it, and go. And they had Major Burns do it 3 straight times before anyone else did it. And he was talking with the coaching staff. There were 3 guys over there, and then he would go back and kind of talk with some of the younger players. he's now graduated to I'm kind of in control here. And it was very obvious they were having him demonstrate the drill 3 different times to show everyone how it's to be done. And that, to me, demonstrates that the staff has a real trust in him and that he knows what the heck's going on out there. And finally, you've got a situation where the defense is not hitting the ground running with a new defensive coordinator. Dave Aranda in 19, Bo Pelini in 20, Durante Jones in 21, House in 22, 4 years, 4 coordinators. Finally, for the first spring in 5 years, you're not trying to put in a new system. You're just having guys work on the system they've been indoctrinated into and what they need to do to fulfill their potential in it. That's just a positive. Any way you want to spin it, that is a positive. And so I was it's not something that you learned today, but it's just something to consider as we go out to spring ball. You got Denbrock over there, you got House over there, you got Kelly over there. Finally, a little bit of a semblance of some stability.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the Hunt Palmer Show on YouTube. If you don't mind, throw us a like right below and hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next time.